The Get Tough strategy on crime has been sending more people to prison since the 1970s. Since that time, there's been a decrease in crime, and that's one reason to argue for more incarceration. But that's being disputed by a new report from the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law. And the equation has also been questioned by the policy group MassINC, which organized the presentation of the study at the State House. I'd like to welcome from MassINC the Director of Research, Ben Forman. Thank you very much for being with us, Ben.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ben, talk about this equation about punishment and crime here, because I guess initially this seemed to be working, that with more people in prison, fewer people are out there committing crimes.
Yeah, we've seen a dramatic decrease in both property crime and violent crime over the past couple of decades. At the same time, we've seen a dramatic increase in sending people to prison and keeping them there for a pretty long while. And so it's common sense that maybe one caused the other, but there's been almost the same drop in crime in many countries around the world, and no country uses incarceration the way we do in the United States. Never in our history have we sent as many people to prison, and so when scientists look at the research and why we've seen such a dramatic drop in crime, they don't believe that using prison more is responsible for very much, if any of it.
Well, what about the other reasons why crime might go down?
There are dozens of reasons, and if you start to unpack them, it's hard to tell how much to attribute to each of them. They range from everything from not putting lead in gasoline. When we do that, the lead ends up in kids, and then it affects their brain development. It makes them more prone to violent outbursts. So some of the drop in crime is attributed to that. Things like the use of abortion and not as many kids ending up in really fragile families, has contributed some.
Or not as many kids, period.
That's another thing, just the change of the demographics of the population. That always happens. We always have crime waves up and down. And generally, we've been able to associate them with just fewer people in the youngest age group where people offend. We know that almost everybody stops offending once they get to 30 or 40 at the latest. And so when you have a big birth cohort between 20 and 40, you have a lot of offending. And when you have a smaller one, you have less. So some substantial portion in the reduction in crime that we've seen is attributed to that. But
of course, you'd like to believe that the best way to reduce crime is through prevention. And one form of prevention, I guess, would be how the police operate. Has anything significant changed that you think might have been a positive factor?
Well, that's another one that's difficult to tease out. I think a lot of people believe that the use of data in policing to target public safety resources to areas where crime is occurring in real time almost, and taking a more community orientation towards working with neighborhoods and has contributed to reduction in crime in cities. But I think the jury's still out on that. That's one that people are looking harder at. But what's obviously happened is that a bunch of things have added up to changes in offending. We've certainly hardened the target, and that's contributed to property crime reductions with all kinds of cameras and alarms in vehicles and homes and so forth. So a lot of things are going on all at once, and they all contribute to less crime. But as we've seen crime go down, we've seen prison populations rise, and that disconnect is what's bothering a lot of folks.
Well, one thing that might be driving up the population is the broken windows approach to crime, because part of the strategy is that you come down on people very, very strongly for minor offenses, even smoking marijuana in a park, let's say, or something connected with quality of life. Does that seem to help? Because one of the theories is that if you crack down on the little things, you won't have to crack down on big things.
I think it helps, but that's, again, an area where there's some disagreement, and it goes back to community policing. If you're using community policing in a way that's trying to deter people who are at risk from becoming career criminals and try and find interventions that are going to keep them out of the criminal justice system, that's a positive thing. If you're just trying to add to their rap sheet, that's a negative thing. If we're picking up people, arresting them, incarcerating them, making it so that they can't re-enter society, can't get a job and sustain a family, that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. So that's kind of where, it's in the definition, is how we apply it. And that varies from community to community. So I think models like that, the broken windows model, if you have a crime reduction strategy and it's evidence-based, it can work very well. We've seen that in community after community, but if it's applied loosely and the practice isn't what the research model was, it can maybe do more harm than good.
Well, we do have an idea what people are like once they're locked up. And one of the participants at this presentation was Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins. He talked about the needs of people as they're finishing their sentences at the House of Correction. What does that suggest about what we need to do to prevent them from going back?
Well, one of the best things we can do to prevent people from going back is put them in a position to find gainful employment and return to their lives, repair their connections with their families and loved ones. Unfortunately, often the experience of incarceration makes that very difficult to do. It's difficult to get housing, it's difficult to get your driver's license, so you can get a car and you can get to work. A lot of people have debt associated with their offending. They can't get out from under that. So we're looking at rates of recidivism, the percentage of people who return to jail for another offense, at 60%. And we got to reduce that dramatically to reduce our prison population, because very much of who we're serving in our prisons and jails are repeat offenders. So the sheriff is thinking about how does he use the time that he has with inmates to really rehabilitate them. And that is a dramatic change from where we were a decade ago, when it was very much get tough on crime. People were talking about reintroducing prisoners to the joys of busting rocks. And as they say, busting rocks is not a vocational skill in today's economy.
Bill Weld, 25 years ago, running for governor. Talking about the State House, there are proposals up there, some things that MassINC is on board with. What do you think is the most promising change that needs to be made right now?
Well, we think that there needs to be comprehensive change. A lot of people would like to see mandatory minimums for drug offenses just be completely eliminated. I think that would be one step forward, but that's just a small part of the problem. Really looking at how we divert people from going into prisons in the first place, providing more prevention and treatment on the front end, and then, as we talked about earlier, how do we prepare people to re-enter successfully? So it's going to be some changes to sentencing policy, but there also needs to be changes to the whole approach of how we serve people who've run afoul of the law to make sure that they don't do so again.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
From MassINC, Ben Forman. We'll have more news in just a moment.